Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Facilities Management Now Virtual Summit. I hope you're enjoying all the content so far. For today's closing keynote presentation, Active Shooter Preparedness for Facilities Managers, it's sponsored by our friends from Omnalert. So thank you very much, Omnalert, for making this session possible. Before we start today's program, I'd like to let you know that you can find all the housekeeping items in the resource list widget, which will help familiarize you with today's platform. If you do have any technical difficulty during the session, please click on the help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers common technical errors. If your technical issue does not resolve, please enter a question into the Q&A widget and our team will gladly assist you. And speaking of the Q&A widget, we will be hosting live Q&A with all the speakers at the end of today's session. So please feel free to submit those questions to us through that, and we will try to get them answered for you by the end of the session. All right, and now to kick off today's presentation, I'd like to make a few introductions. My name is Chris Duyard. I'm from Simplify Media and the Facilities Management Advisor, and I'm going to moderate the session today. I'm joined by our guest speakers, Ara Bagdasarian, co-founder of Omnalert, Bruce A. Canal, CPP, Segment Development Manager Education for Education at Access Communications Incorporated, Brandon Rohn, Assistant Director of Training at Navigate 360, and Jeff Morgan, FPEM, Director of Corporate Security and Resiliency at LendingTree. So team, thank you so much for being with us today. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, I'm Bruce Canal with Access Communications. To begin with, we want to talk about a holistic approach for school security in general. And I think all my speakers, all my peers in this group would agree that that's a key important part of a good security plan at any institution, whether it's K-12 or higher education. A holistic approach starts with security measures that begin with policies. That's including the students, the teachers, the administration. It's important that they understand their role. It reminds me of a time, and I know many of us don't want to dwell on past tragedies, but if you think back to Columbine, or think back to Parkland, Florida, the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, you remember that Nicholas Perez knocked on the door of one of the exterior doors, and the door was opened by a student. Many people may not realize if they've not read the after-action report, but that's how he gained entrance into the building. Even a policy that would instruct students not to touch any of those doors or respond to anybody knocking on the door could possibly prevent a potential active assailant situation in the future. That's the policy issue. Then we talk about the security management issue, SROs, and trying a single point of entry, or thinking of your building more as a fortress and not a prison. Many times I have parents say, you know, we're tired of so many rules and regulations that kind of control our kids and these kind of things. But we're not trying to make students prisoners. We're just trying to keep the bad folks out of the building with things like a single point of entry, where you have the main entrance that might have audio, video, intercom, or the kitchen delivery doors. Those kind of things having a single way to get in by either access card or pressing a button for an intercom. Those kind of things. Then it moves to the technology piece. And that's kind of more where I come into, because of my role as a segment development manager for education at Access Communications. My role is to try to help end users determine their security needs that would help in that holistic approach. So let's kind of dive into a few things I want to discuss here real quickly, and just to kind of give you a little breath of what we see new in surveillance technology today. Probably the biggest thing, if you were to label one word in video surveillance, it's analytics. You can hear some other folks in this call talk about their analytics. Analytics are critical because right now, even though Access makes high quality cameras, some of the best in the industry, what we really pride ourselves on is the fact that it is more than forensic evidence of an event. Yes, if you're a school administrator, you would certainly love to be able to go right to the video management system and pull up the video of an event that happened, whether it was a fight in the hallway or an active assailant with a handgun. Yes, all those things. But it's more than forensic evidence of an event. We want to be in the prevention business. We want to try to be part of trying to prevent. So with loitering detection, where you've got folks that maybe at 2 o'clock in the morning are scoping out a back door, how they're going to get into the building. An audio announcement that video that sees that they're standing there too long, or they're trying to pry on a lock on a door or something of this nature, can make an announcement that you're under video surveillance and please stand there and wait for the police to come. That's the kind of thing that we're trying to get involved in. Gun detection, you're going to hear a lot more about that. It's important that we have as much advance notice as we can. By the time the gun starts discharging and students are being injured or fatally or killed, it's too late. We want to get ahead of that curve. So analytics plays a role with sound detection. There's even smoking and vaping detection, which smoking and vaping detection certainly is something that the administrators are concerned with. Many administrators call it the epidemic of the 2020s because kids 14, 15, 16, 17 are vaping when smoking can be detected. Well, they think the vaping cannot, but analytics can do that. And you have radar. Radar is something that you can look out there and see in the middle of the night, somebody in a football field, defaming the football field with spray paint, or trying to come across in the back door, across a parking lot, can see well ahead. If it's 2 o'clock in the morning, nobody's supposed to be in that parking lot, and that gives them advance notice. So some of the features that we have with Access, which are really keen and something you need to know about, is something called Light Finder. And the best way I can describe Light Finder to anyone that's trying to get a visualization, we've heard of infrared. We know what infrared is, certainly. A Light Finder takes it a giant leap forward. It turns a 2 a.m. image into 2 p.m., meaning you still see it in color. You'll see it in color. You'll be able to determine gender and race of the people that are in the view. It's just an amazing thing. It's far more advanced than just infrared. And Zipstream, for those technical guys, for those IT folks on the call that might be looking at this saying, well, yeah, all this stuff takes big bandwidth, and I got students to worry about. Well, Zipstream reduces and compresses that bandwidth 50% at the camera itself. And in audio technology, what's new? Well, the biggest thing is everything is now network audio. You can run it from your smartphone. You can run it from a SIP device on your desk. You can make announcements, or you can have pre-recorded announcements. As I said earlier, you have an announcement that might say you're under video surveillance, so police have been summoned. Please stand there and wait. Well, we hope that they'll take off running. And police may not like the fact that that person took off, but we as school administrators would love it. We'd say, at least he didn't break my door, he didn't get in, he didn't steal 2 laptops and run out. We're part of the prevention program. Or impromptu announcements. Thunderstorms are reported. Everyone needs to leave the playground and come into the school immediately. It can be done right from the smartphone. And the thing is, this is all a regular IP cable. It's just like any other camera or any other device. It's simple to install. It runs from a smartphone. Those are some of the features of the audio that we certainly are concerned with. What's new in access control? Well, a lot of things you're probably already aware of because access control gets a lot of coverage and well-deserved. Yes, it does open doors. Swipe the card, the proximity card opens door, but it can do a lot of other things. It can pay for the lunch. It can pay for bookstore supplies that might be purchased. Football tickets for the game, especially in higher education, it's become really the card for students to not only gain access to their dormitories, but it allows them to go to the food court, pays for the tickets on the football game on Saturday morning, all kinds of things it can do. And the really key thing is, if it's lost or stolen, there's no more recording keys. Go into the management system, turn off immediately that particular card, and it is just a piece of plastic. That is the real beauty of it. I've done it a couple times, 2 times in fact, and when I was a former end user, where I've had to record the keys because a custodian lost their ID and hanging on their ID was a great grandmaster. We've all experienced it. Access control can play a key role in that, and it would also allow a lot less key management issues. That's the real key thing that we can discuss. It's really important to the school administrators, especially the teachers. No more dangling keys on a rope. They just have a card, they can leave in their wallet, leave in their purse. Audio video intercoms are very important. And I'm going to discuss something here in a second of why it has a today response, and a tomorrow solution as well. I'll discuss that in a second. But audio video intercoms are very critical to what I call the fortress, the single point of entry. Going back again, looking at past tragedies. If you look at Sandy Hook Elementary, Adam Lanza, many people don't know this, he pressed an audio intercom, and while they wouldn't let him in, he then discharged his firearm and shot out the glass and made his way through. I believe that this very day that probably saved lives, because when he fired his weapon, he then was able to gain access. But the first time he would have discharged that weapon might have been inside the building if they would have let him in, or if the door was unlocked. And that kind of leads me to something else I want to discuss real quickly. I know my time is limited, and many of you may not be aware of this. Many of you are certainly have heard about the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan Act. American Rescue Plan Act was just signed into law a couple of weeks ago. The CARES Act goes back to March 2020. But I want you to be aware of this, and I'll make this really quick. There's a lot of money out there for K-12 and higher education that can go to security solutions. If it has a solution today that might mitigate the spread of COVID-19, it has a tomorrow solution for you of access control or better coverage in your building, or video intercom doors at the main entrance in the cafeteria or the kitchen area. It has a today and tomorrow kind of response to it. So just be aware of this. It's more than PPE. Basically what it comes down to is the language that when you're petitioning for this money, how does it mitigate COVID-19? That's all you have to explain. So if you think that audio video intercoms at the main entrance will keep less people from coming in the building or people from getting in the building, perfect. That's the solution. That's great. It mitigates the spread. If you're talking about having audio, IP audio, where you can make announcements, the principal can remind everybody to keep 6 feet apart. In this case now, CDC says 3 feet apart and wear a mask. Those kind of things, those are perfect solutions. So with that, I know it went kind of fast, but I want to make sure we have ample time for questions at the end. It's my pleasure now to introduce the founder of OmniAlert, Ara Baghdasaryan.
Thanks, Bruce. Appreciate it. And great foundation for what we're going to talk about here. And to your point, it's really about prevention, right? Taking a proactive approach to active shooter. How can we prevent this from happening? Utilizing technology, utilizing knowledge, training, best practices. It's not just one or the other. They need to be used together as a holistic approach, as you mentioned. So with that, let's take a look at a situation that is happening right now. Let's say there's a hallway in the facility, school, back entrance where an individual, a bad actor has brandished a firearm. And the question is, what do we do now? Now what? Okay, we see this happening. Perhaps we don't see this happening depending on the current situation. So question is, what do we do? And if we look at things from the current lens, we tend to be reactive. Typically, someone might see the gunman and then call for help after seeking shelter and initiating those protocols. The firearm is discharged, so now once again you react to that situation. You have to manually initiate your mass notifications, your emergency notifications, calling 911, first responders, EMT. That's all happens manually. And the reality is, and especially this is pertaining to schools, that by the time that you have first responders and law enforcement arrive on site, the shooter situation has already subsided. And so it's every second counts. And how do you get ahead of that? That's the key thing. And by taking a proactive approach, you can take a more preventative approach to this. So by this, we mean leveraging existing surveillance camera systems that already exist. Most schools, facilities have some sort of system in place today. So that's something that we need to leverage. Secondly, utilizing artificial intelligence. You can only be watching so many camera feeds at once. The human eye has the ability to comprehend and identify threats at a very limited capacity. Thirdly, automating your lockdown process is absolutely critical. You cannot do one step at a time manually. The time that it takes to do that is going to have an impact on the outcome of the overall situation. and making sure that everyone is whether you're a school, a manufacturing facility, a college campus, make sure that staff and students are trained on what to do. It's great to notify people that there's an active shooter situation, but knowing what to do is absolutely critical, because it comes down to the key word, prevention. Okay, we're going to keep driving this whole concept that it's all about taking action, the action of stopping something from happening or arising. So how are we going to do that? And great movie I'm sure you've all seen, with using precognition to be able to identify before crimes are going to happen. Well, we're not there yet. We don't have precognition today, but we do have technology that can, rather than predicting things in advance, can stop things from happening the moment it happens. So let's take a look at this, the hallway scene utilizing technology that exists today. So using artificial intelligence, the firearm is detected, and now within a matter of seconds, the entire emergency response plan for active shooter has been initiated, giving a head start to those in the school. And the point I want to make with this is that it is absolutely critical that the first minute of an incident, the first minute that the firearm is brandished, the first minute that you identify the threat is what I refer to as the most important minute. How that plays out impacts the entirety of the response in your situation. So from a communications perspective, really the three areas of that first and most important minute is number one, alerting, and I have to preface this by this is all automated. So being able to automate your entire first minute series of actions is absolutely critical. So alerting, sending out notifications to faculty, students, staff, employees, first responders, law enforcement, initiating that third-party safety technology, whether it's access control systems, alarm systems, but being able to connect to those and initiate that, so you have the ability to lock down. And all of this is automated. The second aspect is mobilizing your first responder resources, getting law enforcement dispatched, first responders. The leading cause of death in active shooter situations is loss of blood. And if you have EMT on site, just even a few minutes earlier, that can make a significant impact on the outcome of the overall event and the mortality of the victims of the situation. The third aspect is collaborating. I say I have a spelling error in mobilize, but collaborating. Okay, setting up a unified remote, unified command. Could be remotely, where Bruce and Brandon may be on vacation somewhere, but there's a situation that requires their attention. Being able to patch in your emergency response team instantly to be able to review video footage, discuss the next steps in your emergency action plan is critical, and then continuously inform people on what's happening. That's how it all comes together. And I always like to pull this out here. Everyone, I'm sure everyone watching has a plan. Hopefully it's online or in a digital format, but being able to take everything for each of your different situations, active shooter, for example, active shooter lockdown, and being able to map that and automate that and launch it simultaneously is critical to getting ahead of the situation at hand. So I'm going to show you a brief video that gives you a quick case study demonstration of what I'm talking about here and how it ties in from Bruce's camera access control systems, the training that Brandon's been talking about, and implementing this on a campus environment, whether it's corporate, higher education, K through 12, any sort of campus can apply.
Alert Gun Detect uses artificial intelligence to identify firearms on existing video surveillance systems in real time. After a two-step verification process, a group of administrators are notified to confirm the threat and launch a predefined scenario in seconds. For example, a lockdown scenario can notify people via text message and phone calls. Law enforcement and first responders can be summoned, digital signs and desktops are alerted, a video conference is launched with the emergency response team, and access control system initiated. All of this within seconds of detecting a firearm.
Okay, there we go. And the nice thing is that this technology, this stuff exists today, and it's still very new technology, but it is available today and can help prevent tragedy from happening. So the last thing I want to go through here is looking at timelines, because it's all about, everything is a race against the clock when it comes to responding with active shooter situations. So if we look against the reactive approach, pretty much today where we are, the firearm is presented, as you saw in the video, and it takes several minutes before the individual makes their way and initially discharges the firearm. And at that point, we do our first response actions with the lockdown, LS procedures, run, hide, fight, after the firearm is discharged. And this can be a minute, 2 minutes into the time that the firearm was presented. And then several minutes later, first responders, EMT, lockdown, the notification goes out to initiate that lockdown, because typically you're going to be the individual is going to be seeking shelter once that firearm is discharged. They're not going to call 911 at that moment in time. So the race against the clock is very different from taking a proactive approach. So let's look at this version of the same situation. So the firearm is revealed. It is detected within a matter of seconds. The firearm is detected. The administrator can then initiate a lockdown within a matter of, let's say, 2 to 3 seconds. At that point in time, your run, hide, fight, or LS protocols are activated within 3 seconds of identifying the firearm on a camera. First, 911, first responders, and police are summoned. The lockdown alert goes to the entire campus, all employees, so letting them know where the firearm was detected, so you know whether to run, hide, fight, or deploy what aspects of the Alice protocols. And so by the time that your first responders and police arrive, it's about 3 minutes into the situation. And the factor that is absolutely critical is having EMT folks on site. If somebody was injured, they have that much time. It's all about getting a head start during a situation. And so as it gets discharged. So just finally, I just want to cover a few points just to refresh. So number one, leveraging preventative technology, not just response technology, but preventative technology, and giving a head start to that response, a head start to your Alice protocols, which Brandon is going to talk about in a few seconds here. Automating that first minute action. All of those actions can be automated, so it minimizes the time. And then finally, knowing what to do with confidence. If your employees, your students, staff all feel confident in what to do and how to respond when an active shooter alert goes out or notification is presented for active shooter or lockdown, you feel confident in what you do. And to expound upon that, I'm going to hand it over to my friend Brandon Rohn from Navigate 360, Alice trainer, to go through that portion of your response.
Great, thanks, Art. Appreciate it, and thanks for the opportunity. And two great speakers come before me, so tough acts to follow. But in talking about following up in the next step of the process, right, where we talk about preventive measures, we're gonna talk about responsive measures in this Alice response. And so thinking about what are we going to do, or what is it you're going to do? Have you thought about what you're going to do? Do you even have have you ever given any thought to that? And what does it look like at your organization level? And so that's what we're going to talk about here. And so when we think about these events that have happened all across our nation in every organizational type, what we can agree on is that there's no one particular organization that is susceptible to these type of events only. We've seen these events happen in healthcare, house of worship, corporate America, education, government facilities. And so we think about, what does training look like, right? And so when you look at this slide, you see the quote, "It helped me stay calm." There's a person who was in a mall during shooting and resorted back to that training. And we'll talk very briefly at a high level about how the human body functions in that stress-induced environment. In this sight and facing danger, the human body has three basic responses: fight, flight, or freeze. fight and flight being trained response, freeze being that untrained response. And that's what we need to get people out of. And so you see that here in that quote where it says, help me stay calm, right? Going back to that stored response when that level of danger happened. And when we talk about having this conversation and training for these proactive option-based measures, we really look at it like another life lesson, right? And so all of us remember that period of time, right? If I were to ask anybody in this webinar right now, what would you do if the building you were sitting in caught on fire? All of you would say without hesitation, you would leave. If I asked you, what would you do if your clothes caught on fire? All of you would say without hesitation, stop, drop, and roll. And how did we get there? We got there because there was this educational process. There was this training. There were fire drills. As a student from kindergarten to a graduating senior, we heard it at a minimum of 9 times a year for 13 years. That's roughly 130 times we participated in this exercise. Repetition, that condition of learning. And so we look at this Alice proactive option-based strategy from the same lens, right? Another life skill. What would we do when we find ourselves facing that violent critical incident? We would go to that stored response, whether it be to remove ourselves from that dangerous location or render that location no longer dangerous. And we do that through some option-based training, and we're going to look at that. Most importantly, when we talk about training, when you think about being a K-12 organization or a daycare or a facility that has residential treatment and services, what does training look like for the folks within your organization? And so our training is not only age, but ability appropriate. Teaching and training each individual at the level in which they can understand, comprehend, and physically carry out the task at hand to increasing their survival. Because ultimately, that's the ultimate goal when we find ourselves facing this violent critical incident, is survival, right? Is to be able to go home with all the same scars, marks, and tattoos that we left that house with on that particular day. And so we need to empower individuals, and we need to equip them to be able to respond to this event. But we need to do it in the appropriate manner. And we do that. We do that at a age and ability appropriate. And there's curriculum that outlines our K-12 lesson plans and standards. There's curriculum that outlines special education students. There's curriculum. So it all applies to the individual at the point of where they are, right? And so that's important because as the old saying goes, everything's not for everybody. And there's not just one way to train. We have to train multiple ways to get people to understand what they need to understand. And we do that through the ALICE training. When we talk about ALICE training, yes, it is an acronym. It stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. I like to look at these as a buffet of options, understanding that a situation may dictate how I respond, but if I only have one option to go to, then that may not be the best response for that particular situation. Here with ALICE, I have options. Based on the alert I receive, I can make a decision to either lock down, counter, or evacuate. Whichever one of those is going to increase my survivability in that immediate moment. And that's what we want to do. We want to increase survivability rather quickly by first identifying, recognizing, and responding to that alert. So going back to Aria's presentation, right, that alert could be that display of the firearm in the camera system. That's an alert, right? We don't need to wait for that shot to be fired. That firearm, that recognition has been detected, that firearm's detected, that's an alert. We need to start responding to that. And so it's important that we recognize and understand, and not to bring ourselves to a position where we don't want to believe it, right? We think, well, maybe that's not it, right? You need to recognize and respond to it and pick one of those buffet of options. This program is really based in math and science, ladies and gentlemen. It comes down to numbers, and it comes down to the kinesiology of a human being, how the human body functions in a stress-induced environment. I would love to spend the next 8 hours talking to you about that, but I got about 8 seconds. So I'm going to to keep moving it along. But really, when you look at what ALICE training does, it talks about the numbers. Aria talked about getting your emergency responders there, your police, your fire, your EMS. You see, the fire service realized long ago, folks, that they're not going to get there fast enough, right? And so that's why they put mandated fire extinguishers and sprinkler systems and all those kind of things. Fire extinguishers are not in our buildings to hand the first firefighter when he walks in the door. It's for the people that are already there to address the problem. Why? Because it's a matter of time. It's the math. When we look at the science, how does counter and how does evacuate work? Some of you may be familiar with a gentleman by the name of retired Colonel Lieutenant Boyd. When you look at this picture on the right here, you see a depiction of what he calls the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. That's how we process hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pieces of information every single day. We're going to use that to our advantage to increase our survivability with our violent intruder. And an example of that is this slide from a depiction from Virginia Tech on the second floor. Again, I could spend the next 4 hours talking about this, but I got 4 seconds. So we're going to talk about the importance of this slide is simply look at classroom 204 and 205. 204 and 205 versus 206, 207, and 211. And the message here, folks, is look at the double-digit survivability and the classrooms that had a proactive response versus the double-digit survivability of the classrooms that had a passive response. And it's basically 28 versus 2. 2 people died in a room that took a proactive response versus the 28 and a non-proactive response. And so in a passive response. And so that clearly delivers us the message that proactive option-based training works. And we were the first to do it. We were the leading in 2001, and we're still the leading in that space today. And so we talked a little bit, a very brief appetizer, as I like to call it, of that training. And so how do you get this training? How do you get your hands on this thing that I just talked about? Well, we're able to deliver it to you in 3 different forms: through an e-learning module online where it's self-paced, you can run it at your own pace. You have a full library to pick from, and it's documented, recorded, and tested training. We also have on-site, in-person live training. That's my favorite, right? Let's get in and put our hands on it, because we understand people learn in several different ways, and we like to train in what I like to call the hear, see, do methodology. So that way we scratch everybody where they itch, and we can do that very simply and very effectively in that on-site training. And then we have live virtual training, where myself or another national trainer would come and present to you this content in a virtual format and be able to tailor it to your organization and still give you the nuts and bolts, the foundation of everything you need. It's just different from in person. It's on a computer and it's virtual. And so that's how we could deliver this training to you and how you can implement this training within your organization. And so without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff to talk to you a little bit about his preparedness.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandon. And thanks to everybody for this opportunity. Again, Jeff Morgan, I'm the Director of Corporate Security and Resiliency for LendingTree. I've been here for about 2 years. And before joining LendingTree, I was at the University of Central Florida for 11 years as the Director of Emergency Management and Security. I have the honor to work very closely with facility folks all the time. In fact, here at LendingTree, we currently have multiple construction sites and projects going on, and we have 9 sites over the U.S. and also 1 overseas. So my background is primarily in emergency management and physical security for the last 20 years. So my presentation, I broke it down to basically the 5 phases of emergency management. So I wanted to kind of talk about some of my experience working with facilities folks, doing planning, design, and those type of things through these 5 phases. So the first one here you see is prevention. There are courses out there like CEPTED here, which is crime prevention through environmental design, that can help facilities folks, architects, design folks, even your landscape folks understand what they can do to help with keeping a site secure, the lighting that goes into a facility, all the way from design to either renovation and even for planning purposes as well. So these are things that can help deter any type of potential threats and also help people conduct risk assessments as well for their different facilities. And as we heard Bruce talk about earlier, access control and video surveillance, that's very important. That's a very useful prevention tool. It's going to allow you, again, to do deterrence. It's going to let you, I guess, capture any type of suspicious activity. If someone's roaming around the facility or walking through the building or taking photos, things like that. So you can also pick up any type of trends or patterns. Some of the things we look for, like, folks wearing a jacket on a hot day or carrying a large bag that's probably not common for that particular location. So those are things that you can take a look at. And again, you can use analytics for some of those things too. And one of the things I've learned as we kind of build out these programs and these sites is on your access control, you want to do your best to integrate that with your human resources software as well. So if you have like a high threat type of termination, those folks should be removed out of your access control system right away. So integrating that with your HR software allows you to do that. And if you are a person that operates in a multi-tenant facility, or your facility manager that manages a multi-tenant facility, you want to make sure that when your tenants have a high-risk termination, or even any type of termination, that they're notifying you, so that way you're not also letting those folks into the building when they shouldn't be there as well. So those are some of the prevention things that we focused on. So next we have mitigation. So what we've done in a lot of our sites is, we take a visit and we will walk through that space with law enforcement, and we'll identify what we call like safe rooms. So as you heard some of our guest speakers talk today about lockdowns. So these are spaces where people can go. If they can't find, for whatever reason, to run, hide, fight, and they aren't able to do that first part, is run and get away, we should give them a location to try and go and hide. So pre-identifying rooms that are going to be safe for you, having maybe instructions on the back of the door what to do when they go in there, to remind them to turn off the lights, to silent cell phones and other type of measures that you would want them to do. Those are things you want to take a look at from a mitigation perspective. And one thing I've noticed here, recently, with a lot of our design of our new facilities, we look at things like, a lot of folks are trying to go for that LEED, platinum or gold certification, right? So some of that, I personally feel like there are some particular risks and some kind of vulnerabilities that come with those type of certifications. And what I mean by that is sometimes you build this beautiful facility, and on the inside you got these huge glass walls, right? So we teach people to run, hide, and fight, and now we're taking away the opportunity to be able to hide, right? So those are things you need to take a look at and consider. So some things like some of these security film that you can put on the windows that can it may not stop a bullet from going through it, but it's going to slow a person down from gaining entry into that space. And the more you can slow them down, the sooner the cops can show up to terminate that threat as well. One of the things that we've also learned as we kind of started doing a lot of our active shooter training and within different facilities is some of these LEED programs, you're using occupancy sensors, right, to turn on lights. So if your training is to go, run, hide, and fight, and people try to hide, and you're asking them to turn off the lights, and now you have an occupancy sensor in there, maybe having a switch so you can override that occupancy sensor to turn off the light, because the first time they move, that light comes on, and now that person knows that there's some kind of activity in that space. So those are things you want to kind of consider whenever you do mitigation for your facilities. On the protection side of the house, of course, this is where your policies and procedures, and you've heard us talk about this earlier. You want to know what you need to do. You need to know how you're going to do, not with just the current event, but even post-event. So how are you going to deal with the media? How are you going to work with family folks that's going to show up because they've heard something happen and they want to check on their loved ones? So you want to make sure you have some kind of a plan on how you're going to manage those folks and not just have a primary building, but have a primary and an alternate, because that primary building may be where your incident is. So you need to think about those things, especially if you have a large campus and multiple buildings are responsible for how you can do that. And make sure that they're equipped to be able to support those type of needs as well. And a lot of your emergency managers and law enforcement and fire folks can help you guys with that kind of a discussion as well. So next, the last two phases here, we're going to talk about response and recovery. So on the response side, you want to make sure, and you heard Brandon talk about this a little bit earlier about incident command structure. So you want to know as a facility manager, you may not think you have a role in the incident command structure, but I'll tell you, you do. Because I've had experience where, the facilities folks would show up and we would tie them next to the incident commander because that person knows that building a lot better than anybody else that's showing up to respond to it. So consider maybe some way to identify yourself as a facilities person that could show up and provide some good information. I know, for instance, we had a situation where we had a suspicious package in the building, and we pulled our facilities person, and they spoke with our bomb tech team, and they're putting a robot through the building. And what the floor plan didn't show you was past a certain door, there was a set of steep stairs, and that would have been probably disastrous for that robot. So things like that are very critical to help folks be able to make decisions on how do you want to respond to things like for any type of facility. And then, of course, having a mass communications plan. And then, whenever, so that way you can communicate people when they can re-enter the building and things like that. And if you ever have to leave the building, and Ara kind of talked about those safety binders, you might want to have a go bag, something that's going to have floor plans, an overview map of the site, list of contractors that you may have to contact if you need to, kind of recover from a situation. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So you just want to make sure that you're able to have a plan and be able to bring that with you in case you leave, because I've seen it many times where people, they leave a building right away and they've left a lot of things behind that they needed to bring with them and they didn't have it. So have those things either on, some of your plans on your phones or whatever it is. If it's mobile, that'd be really ideal. And of course, you want to do a lot of exercises and drills, and you want to have a very strong partnership with your local first responders. Invite them to your facility, walk through it, talk about different scenarios, so that way this isn't the first time you're seeing it. One of the things that I've noticed too, and we've had to address in the past, was you go onto a campus, a large campus, whether it be a school or a company, whatever it may be. Some of these buildings aren't very clearly marked, and some folks are calling them by numbers or by names or by acronyms. It can be very confusing whenever you're trying to get first responders out there. So have a communication plan on how you want to break that down. Finally, on the recovery side here, so this is where, after a lot of these events that has occurred, these are things you should be thinking about, like, do you have a contract for like a biohazard cleanup? I know, unfortunately, in my past, we've had to work through an active shooter situation, and it happened in a dorm room environment. So now you had to pull carpet, you got to repaint, you got to clean up the biohazard after the crime scene has been cleared, things like that. So do you have those contractors on standby, or have you thought about things like that too? So very important. And then, what do you do about your facility? So think about, I've been in a lot of presentations where people talked about where after an active shooter situation, now there's bullet hole damages and bullet holes, concrete walls and things like that. How do you patch that out? How do you make people feel a little bit more comfortable to re-enter the building after an incident like that? So short-term things you can consider is, you want to make sure folks feel comfortable, the right timing on how you can bring people back in. Some folks decided to, just take the building down and remove it, so that way it's something they didn't want to think about, have to relive again. So those are things you might want to think about how that would impact your facility and your business. I know some of the short-term things that we had at that dormitory active shooter, the individual activated the fire pull station to draw people out of their rooms into the hallways. And I can tell you, it took us months after that situation to get people to be comfortable about actually still leaving a building when the fire alarm goes off. So we had a lot of sessions where fire rescue folks came down, and we had counselors talking with students and even parents to kind of explain to them that, look, if the fire alarm goes off, you still need to leave the building, and kind of doing some softer drills and kind of getting people a little bit more comfortable, so that way you can think about that from a short-term perspective. And then long-term, of course, you see this on TV, and you see this happening at all these other sites where we have active shooter events. One of the things that you should plan for is, people leaving behind things like flowers and personal belongings and items like that for a long term. I know I saw this firsthand at the Pulse nightclub shooting that happened in Orlando, and you gotta be very mindful of what you do with a lot of those belongings and what you do with those devices, those things that are left behind too. So do you create a memorial for those kind of things, and how do you address that? So things that you should think about probably now versus when the actual event happens. But those are kind of my lessons learned as an emergency manager, working with a lot of our facilities folks on how we want to work through and and talk through an active shooter incident from the 5 phases of emergency management, and include that in our planning, in our exercises, and our drills. And I'm hopeful that was very helpful for you all. And so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Chris for any type of questions and answers at this point.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. We have plenty of questions that have come in. So let's see, where are we going to start? I think this one might be best for Ara. Someone is asking, when will the gun detection system be implemented nationwide? Is there a timeline for that?
Okay, so it is available today. We are engaged in a number of pilot programs nationwide in various facilities, schools, college campuses, manufacturing facilities. So it is currently available, and organizations have the option to tie it in with the emergency notification system of OmniAlert, which really allows you to make the detection and then initiate the lockdown protocol automatically, or using other third-party systems. But it is currently available.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Let's see. Someone else here is asking, can you explain why school districts should be cognizant of responding quickly to an active assailant, and why is time so critical?
I'll take that question.
Okay.
Basically,
Excellent.
Chris, what the best answer to give is this is turned right to the United States Secret Service. They just conducted I think it was a 6 or 7 year study of active assailant, active shooter situation in the education world, not necessarily the business world, but it probably is a close parallel. What they learned, and this was released, I think it was in November 2020. What they learned is that these events are very short-lived. That's why it's critical to know your response, to have analytics that might help you determine, that a gun is present and that you're ready to respond and lock the doors or escape from the building, whatever it needs to be. Because, and I'm going to kind of do this a little bit from memory, but I think it was somewhere in the 80 to 85% of all the events were over in 5 minutes. And or I think it was even more than that, probably 90% were over in 5 minutes, and 75 or 80% were over in 3.5 minutes. They don't last very long. It either ends with the shooter terminating his own life, or he escapes, or whatever might happen. But with SROs in schools, the response time is better. But the fact of the matter is, it's a short-lived event. And that's why I think it's critical. We need to be ready to respond so much quicker than just thinking, 10 or 15 minutes, the police will be here, they'll neutralize the threat, and we'll be good to go. But in 10 or 15 minutes, it'll all be over, and there could be tens of 20s of students injured or killed.
That's Bruce. And what's interesting with that is that early detection allows that head start, even a 10-second head start to initiate run, hide, fight, to initiate ALICE protocols can make the world of difference. I mean, it sounds like a short period of time, but 10 seconds is a long period of time when you're in a situation like that.
Excellent. That actually tees up this next question perfectly. This one I think is for Brandon. How does run, hide, fight differ from ALICE?
We get that question a lot. So a couple of things. Number one, ALICE is an actual training program. And so when you think about run, hide, fight, it's great. It's a great informational program, right? But when you think about a training program, when you look at it from how do you define training, is how can you document or how can you prove that a person received run, hide, fight training and had enough comprehension of it that they could use it when they need it. So when we look at ALICE training, it's an actual training program that is tested and documented, so that when unfortunately we all know the reality of the world is at some point there's going to become a legal battle, and the question is going to be asked is what was trained, and how can you prove that you conducted training versus received some information. And so that's really the difference, a training program versus an informational session. Excellent.
Thank you. Let's see, moving along here. Are there privacy concerns? I'm assuming that's with in relation to the AI gun detection.
Regarding privacy, I mean, we do not, at least with the OmniAlert gun detect technology, we're solely detecting firearms and other objects. We are not employing facial recognition, which does open a different dialogue regarding privacy concerns and employing that facial recognition technology. But we don't go there. We're solely focused on the object detection.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Let's see. This one's for Jeff and Bruce. Should you automatically lock the facility doors if a gun is detected outside a building?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, sure. I mean, anything that you can do to slow things down. So, I mean, that's always been a tough question every time we had to do any type of active shooter training is, especially when you identify things like a safe room. So once you lock that door and someone's knocking on the door to try to get back in and try to get in that space, the folks inside that room got to make a decision on how they're going to do that. So, locking a door, as long as people have the ability to egress, that's the important thing. But trying to lock folks out, that's just as important. But I can tell you one of the things that we did for our access control system is when you have a feature to lock down a facility, the one thing you want to think about is, that card access that the police officers may have to get into the space. You don't want to lock those folks out. So I know for the particular access control system that we use, there's an ability to be able to say, this is a lockdown feature that we want to be able to do, but these particular cards will be able to still override that lockdown. So that way first responders can get in. So whether that's in a Knox box or with that facility manager or whoever can hand that over to the authorities when they get there, those folks can now quickly get access to the space. So those are things you want to think about when you start talking about securing your facilities.
Let me add one other thing to that, just kind of a little different perspective, a little twist to that. When you talk about locking the doors, I think we all agree now things have changed. It's evolved in terms of, and Alice is probably one institution that's kind of made us more aware of our thinking and how we probably need to approach it differently. But if we have an active shooter in the building and you're in your classroom, locking the door may not be the right thing to do. Escaping might be the proper thing to do. We're not there. The sad part about it is none of the four of us are there to help you. You have to make this decision on your own. But if it is a decision to stay, yes, locking the doors is imperative. And many studies have concluded from those assailants who've survived, either not been killed or taken their own life, they've told us many times that if they came to a locked door, they moved on. They're kind of taking the path of least resistance. And I think Brandon kind of illustrated that when he talked about Virginia Tech University. Those last two rooms, I think it was 207 and 209, I believe it was off the top of my head, they had barricaded themselves well enough that the perpetrator just didn't feel it wasn't going to spend the time to try to get in. That's basically what it was. There could be other victims a lot easier to take, and they just move on. So that's why I think it's critical to learn to lock those doors and barricade those doors, remain quiet, turn out the lights, those kind of things.
Excellent. Thank you for those responses, gentlemen. We have two questions that kind of circle around the same thing here, so I'm going to try to combine them. Does the lockdown happen automatically when a gun is detected with OmniAlert? And how reliable are those detections, or what is the system false notification rate?
That's a great question. Both of those are great questions, and they do play into one another. So the AI is constantly learning from false detections, and we do that both in our facility as well as with customers. We constantly feed that. So the lockdown scenarios are not automatically initiated. There's a 3-step verification process. The first step is utilizing the AI. Is this a firearm? Yes or no? Yes, it is. Step 2, is this being used in a range of motion that would signify that it is an active gunman versus a firearm sitting on a desk or a holstered firearm in a law enforcement. So once those 2 steps happen, then it goes to a 3rd step, which is what we call human in the loop. So a group of administrators, your emergency response team could be 1 person, could be 100 people, all receive a push notification simultaneously with an image and a brief video of the detection And once that is verified by a human, it can be any administrator would initiate that lockdown scenario or any sort of predefined series of actions from their mobile device. So systems constantly learning, machine learning, but regardless of that, there's a human in the loop process because you do not want to initiate a lockdown on a false alarm.
Excellent. Thank you.
Let me add on, Chris. Let me add to that because I want to give a real life story to that. I want to go back to the Nicholas Cruz shooting at Parkland, Florida. I said earlier that he had gained entrance by knocking on a door and a student let him in. By the way, that student survived. He let that student leave, and he left the building. But that's where he actually took his semi-automatic rifle out of the case. And if there was even a camera in that hallway or that stairwell that had Omni Alert on it, we would have detected that firearm there because they estimate about a minute before he actually discharged the first round. So there, to R's point, you'd had maybe up to 60 seconds to have seen his semi-automatic rifle before he discharged the first round. And if we're talking about events that may last only 5 minutes, that 60 seconds really could have been valuable and perhaps saved a lot of lives, if not saved all the lives. So that's why it's critical that you have that triple verification, but you do get a human being involved in it.
Excellent. Okay. Wow. So many questions to choose from here. For Jeff, how do you collaborate during an incident?
So that's going to be really comes down to your plans and how you train, right? So there's two things that you got to think about, and it really depends on, I guess, the facility you're at. So if you're on a campus environment like a university or a school, and you have a lockdown plan, more likely your folks that you want to help, respond to collaborate is going to be probably locked down in their facilities, right? So those folks, your university president, your PR folks, other people that's going to help you with the response and the recovery efforts are going to be locked down. So you got to think about how you want to do that. So we've used a software for crisis management that allows you to do that remotely. So you can actually log in from a safe location on your phone or a tablet or any computer and log in and start working on an incident and start implementing your plans and your checklists. So that's something that your emergency management team that you have identified can start working on, and contacting your contractors that's going to have to help you respond and clean up and things like that. Having a communication plan on what are you going to share with your PR folks and your press briefings and things like that. So those conversations need to happen. And then, how do you collaborate on incident command? More likely you need to have a relationship with your folks. We had very clearly marked vehicles for our emergency management staff. So when we show up on scene, our law enforcement and fire rescue folks know to raise that yellow tape and let us in so we can go ahead and integrate in. And then we show up with our plans, our checklists. We bring in our facilities folks and those type of people too. So it's definitely going to have to be part of your plan. It's going to have to be part of something that you train and exercise very often. But definitely those are the things that you should consider, especially for an active shooter incident. So that virtual environment, and now that we've had to go through this pandemic, working from home and being able to do things virtually, people are a lot more comfortable with now today than they were probably over a year ago. So good question.
And Jeff, just one more thought to add on to that, especially with the slide up there with the recovery. The folks that are attending the webinar, please bookmark the page vtvcare.org, VTV, victim-to-victim-care.org. And hopefully you never have to ever visit that website. But the families, it's something that you don't think about is in the aftermath of an active shooter situation. What about the victims? What about their families? And VTV Care was formed by the families and survivors of the 2007 Virginia Tech massacre. And through their experiences, they had no resources. They had no network to provide resources and guidance on how to adapt, how to live your life after the situation. And it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime of healing, and it's something that you never get over. But VTV Care is, like I said, the families of Virginia Tech, and they provide those resources. And you don't think about it, and hopefully you never have to pull up that tab on your web browser. But something you should be aware, something you should add to your emergency response plans, your action plans. If this happens, there are some other resources, but this is very specific to the long-term care and support for families and survivors of active shooter situations.
Excellent, thank you. Now we're coming up on time, but we do have a ton more questions to get through. Do you gentlemen mind hanging around for another moment while we answer maybe two more? Excellent.
Sure.
So, Brandon, this one came in for you. What type of proactive measures did the Virginia Tech classrooms apply? And I'll push that slide back up for you.
Sure. So when you talk about Classroom 205, they completely barricaded the door using environmental tools. And Classroom 204, Professor Labrowski, who was a Holocaust survivor, and I think we can all agree that he had an understanding of violence. When the shots rang out in 206 and 207, he immediately instructed the students in the classroom to evacuate via the window, while himself and another student used their bodies to barricade the door to buy some time. The two fatalities that you see in Classroom 204 are Professor Labrowski and the other student. And that's unfortunate. When the gunman, when he could not get in, he simply just fired some rounds through the door and unfortunately struck Professor Labrowski and that other student, which then bought him an opportunity. So those were, so you can see in 204 and 205, very close proximity, but two different proactive strategies taken. One, to completely barricade, and the other room, they barricaded and evacuated.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks. And so one last question. I'm going to do another one of those fancy merging of two questions here. So first, two-parter for Ara here. First, how widely deployed is Omni gun detection presently? Any locations or how many locations is it going to be available in Canada? And also, how does this compare with other gun detection analytic systems, like ones that focus on gunshot sound coupled with muzzle flash?
Okay. It's currently deployed in a number of pilot locations around the U.S. I'm not sure about Canada, but it can certainly operate in Canada. And as far as and like I mentioned, healthcare, education, manufacturing, retail, we're actually, working with some, major national retail organizations, especially in light of recent situations. And as far as comparing it to gun detection, gun detection is after a firearm has been discharged. We're really focused on preventing that from even happening. So, if you're looking at a holistic approach, it is certainly a wise idea to have both in place. We are always about all of the above, not relying on one specific technology, one specific notification technology, cell phones, digital signage, landline phones, networks. Anything can go down, but in order to be redundant, you need to employ as many technologies as possible. Philosophically, though, visual gun detection, like OmniAlert Gun Detect, is all about prevention versus audible gun detection, which is really geared towards the firearm has already been discharged. But it's a good idea to employ both sides of the spectrum, if you will.
Excellent. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for hanging out for a couple extra minutes here. And I very much appreciate you being with us here today, and to everyone in the audience for joining our Facilities Management Now Summit. I'd also like to send a huge thank you to our closing keynote sponsor, OmniAlert, for making this whole thing possible. And please keep your eyes peeled for our next and future Facilities Management Summits coming up later in the year. And with that, we will be ending the webinar. Thank you again.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.